Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and founder of Vertex Partnership Academies and International Baccalaureate Charter High School in the Bronx.
Hello, I'm Nique Fajors, a member of the Leadership Network at AEI and an adjunct professor at Rice Business School and WashU, Olin Business School.
All right, Nique, as always, great to see you, and always great to start a new episode where we are seeking to uplift the efforts of an incredible Black man that more people need to know. And I'm very excited that we have today Darius Jones.
Yeah.
Welcome, Darius.
Hello, brothers. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Really looking forward to the conversation. Huge fan of your work. Huge fan of your work.
Well, that goes both ways. That goes both ways. And our audience should know that you are the founder of the National Black Empowerment Council.
Absolutely.
That in just 2 years, right? 2 years.
Well, it'll be four.
It'll be four
in June of this year.
In June of this year. Okay, all right. So you have done a lot in a short period of time. So I want to talk about, we want to engage you on
Absolutely.
the bipartisan effort, the work that you do in Israel, the work that you do around issues in DEI here in the United States with a very different angle. But we always like to start these discussions where you kind of just step back, even before you were the Darius Jones of today, before your time at APAC.
Sure.
And Nique, Darius is also a member of the AEI Leadership Network. And so, but tell us a little bit about when you were growing up, when you first realized that race was a thing, that people seemed to, have feelings about it, or that it meant something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, brothers, I was born into it. Both my parents were educators by profession. They were very active in the civil rights movement. So they really came up as young people when they met in the crucible of all that turmoil and back and forth that was going on in the nation around matters of race. And it really kind of seared itself into their consciousness. So me as the first son, I was privy to just a lot of the conversations that they would have about the dynamics that they saw happening in the country. They were very impressed by a lot of the rapid developments that they saw happening kind of in the wake of the civil rights movement and in my young formative years, and really impressed me as a young person with a sense that there truly were infinite possibilities to what I could accomplish in this world, that people who came before me made tremendous sacrifices, some even making the ultimate sacrifice to open the doors and create the structures through which I could really soar. And one of the things that they never allowed me to do is to really wallow in a sense of not being able to really fulfill what I believe is the purpose that God placed upon my life. I grew up in a household where I was consistently challenged to be better than those around me, to not necessarily look at people of other races and just have the default assumption that there were going to be better life outcomes for them than could ever be possible for me. I was instilled with the notion that I was blessed with abilities, and that if I really worked hard and focused and developed those, and then developed a competitive spirit as it related to my interaction with people outside of the community, that I could flourish. And owning that sense of who I was, bearing that sense of responsibility that I had to those who came before me, and then just having that grit and that drive to really go out and prove to people, both from within my own community and outside my own community, that there were really no limits to what we as a people can accomplish when we have a clear vision and the resilience and the determination to see it manifest. And that's just something that is in my DNA now at this point, 5 decades into the game. And whenever I encounter young people, I always try to, I evangelize around that notion and that sense of who we are and what we're capable of. And in my work with National Black Empowerment Council, it's a leadership development network. And I really try to identify and continually curate a space of people who possess that same worldview and sense of possibilities. Because I believe that fundamentally through the power of networks of enlightened minds, that we can really work together to punch above our weight and to be as the custodians of our generation's efforts to continuously advance our people. I think that well curated networks of like minded people across multiple influential industries working in concert can really continually drive the ball forward.
Yeah. So what part of the country did you grow up in? Because
So
was that
I was born in Gary, Indiana, a couple blocks away from 2300 Jackson Street, where the Jacksons were born. But my mother recognized early on, and this is nothing against Gary, but a lot of major industries had left, and she kind of saw the direction that the city was going in. Unfortunately, and we moved to the city of Houston when I was 5. So I grew up in Houston, but I'm so excited. One of the members of my organization who was possessed of this same worldview that I just talked to you about has recently been elected the mayor of Gary. So he has made it his mission to resurrect the city of my birth. So we are pulling for him and applauding all the successes that he's been having.
all right? We may need to get him on the Invisible Men
We
night.
may need to get him on the Invisible Man.
So speaking of mayors, I understand that your organization actually took out some formal advertisements, outdoor media,
Yeah.
celebrating a select number of Black mayors. Talk to us about that, and then I just have a follow up after you kind of
Mhm.
share with the audience what that was about.
Sure. So, in addition to the National Black Empowerment Council, which is our C3, we also have a C4, which is called the National Black Empowerment Action Fund. We also have Political Action Committee, which is Empowering Black Americans, PAC. And one of the things that we did is in 2024, a couple congressional races in New York and one in St. Louis, there were some elected leaders from our community whose politics were, to call them leftists is to just not really lean into the fullness of just how extreme some of their positions were. And coming from Black communities, they weren't really leading in a way which was prioritizing the interests of the Black community. They seemed to be beholden to ideologies that are a little bit far afield of where most Black folks are. So we got very involved in those races at a C3 and then a C4 standpoint. So a lot of folks in our community not necessarily understanding what they perceive to be kind of like Black on Black political crime, why we as a Black organization would be
'Cause
going.
we're all supposed to think the same, Darius.
Yeah, and we don't. And we don't. And we fortunately, through our efforts, were able to prevail in both of those races and then just help install more effective leadership. And then, so as to not be continuously seen in that role of the spoiler, we also wanted to say if you have a stick, you should have some carrot too. And the mayors who you saw us applauding in that national campaign are members from our organization
Okay.
who are really leading those communities in ways which are empowering Black folks, but then not just Black folks, but the entire city as a whole. They're representative of how we see the future of Black leadership. So politics can often be a thankless job. So we just wanted to show our brothers and our sisters that we appreciate them and to use the banners as a mechanism to kind of help highlight the great work that they're doing within the communities from which they hail.
Brilliant. Well, and my follow up is I noticed that the mayor of Chicago was not on your
Oh, no,
list.
no, no.
Uh,
No, he's not on our list. Um, yeah, a number of mayors in our organization know him, and we have had kind of private conversations about what kind of outreach could be done. Because in anything, mentorship is important. being able to rely on folks who've done it before at a very high level to kind of help add any additional perspectives or institutional knowledge as they might provide um, could have been helpful, but not a lot of success on that front. So,
Wow.
um, we'll see. We'll see. I guess where there's life, there's hope. Maybe he could begin to do things differently, but I'm not gonna hold my breath or bet my salary on it.
Well, I'll tell you, the one positive is the degree to which he has empowered his black constituents to question his leadership, his ability, his decision making. I think you wrote a piece for the Hill recently talking about how we need to kind of reposition ourselves within the political landscape.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and I think, the grassroots activities that are bubbling up in Chicago, I'm very optimistic about that.
Well, absolutely, because people are really focused on like bread and butter issues. For most of the folks in our community, this is existential.
Right.
And when you see somebody that you've elected into leadership that seems to be prioritizing issues other than those, you may give the individual a little bit of grace, have a little bit of patience at the outset, but eventually, if you don't see some responsiveness to your needs, then people start to get antsy. And I applaud the fact that more and more folks within our community are beginning to ask these critical questions and beginning to challenge forlorn assumptions about, just reflexive support for either one side or the other. Critical thought is being exercised. And think it's great that our politicians are now having to embrace that higher measure of accountability. I think it's either going to make them better or it's going to make them ex officios.
Yeah.
Either way,
I love how
in a democracy, the people should really be constantly exercising that force or that impetus for change.
Yeah, I mean, I love how gracious both of you are. I mean, Nike, you said, yeah, you said you're impressed how much the mayor of Chicago has empowered his citizens to speak out. Or you
No,
saying
no, no. If I
he's
said that, that's not what I meant.
no, I'm just saying, right? He doesn't have a choice because people are rising up, you know. But I am curious though, is it what's the like you said, black leadership? It's not, I mean, the people who may be rising up in this particular situation may be particularly black, but isn't it just good leadership that these residents are looking for? Like, how does race intersect in your mind? And then I do want to get to NBEC so you
Sure,
can
of course, of course.
talk about the organization, but so many times I just see bad leaders who might be black, but yeah, tease that out for us
Oh
a
no,
little.
I think more folks are coming into that awareness. That there's a saying, all skin folk ain't kin folk. I mean, a lot of times just because somebody looks like you might have the default assumption that they're going to see the world the way you see the world and come down on important issues in the way that you expect that they do. But folks have different life experiences. In politics, folks often have folks from with divergent agendas who've been helpful in them achieving those offices. So a
Yep.
lot of times when they occupy those offices, they have to widen the aperture and lead on issues that you wouldn't necessarily have expected them to lead on. And I think a lot of that is happening in our community. I think, organizations like Democratic Socialists of America, Our Revolution, Justice Democrats are putting money in some of these races. And then as a result of that, they have agendas and their expectation is that people are going to
Yep.
do things which they prioritize. And increasingly, that's at odds with the everyday salt of the earth issues that Black folks care about. And I'm just happy to see us not putting our head in the sand and becoming more sophisticated about how the game operates and saying, we got a power equation we can leverage too to get you to pay attention to us if you choose not to. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of these cities.
All right. So okay, so let's step back.
Mhm.
Talk about NBEC because we do live in an environment. In this past election, Kamala Harris, I think, got 92% of the Black female vote, as an
Mhm,
example. There is kind of a pressure
mhm.
for Black adults to think a certain way, vote a certain way. So, how does the National Black Empowerment Council talk a little bit about the objectives and then how you address trying to educate our community, the broader community, that there are other considerations to be taken into
Mhm.
making decisions as to who we support?
Absolutely. So the organization is a leadership network and is made up of what I call grass tops leaders in business, politics, academia, health, tech, media, faith community, and philanthropy. Okay. Our theory of change is that you have about 20 to 25 major, mid-major urban areas where Black people live in a high enough concentration to do what I define as being able to punch above our weight in the areas of business and politics. So our organization exists in those areas to identify leaders from those communities, from those various fields, with the theory of change being that if you could get individuals from these various positions to be willing to leverage their resources, their relationships, and their institutional influence, where they work together as civic leaders, that these groups would be able to have a disproportionate amount of positive influence in the cities in which they live. And the notion of being able to effectuate positive change for Black people going forward, most Black political power is concentrated in cities. Okay. If you want to create change at the federal level, that's going to require a lot of resources. That's going to require a lot of relationships. But since municipalities, in many instances, are set up for us to really be in the positions of leadership, National Black Empowerment Council exists to be a force to help empower those who are going to lead our communities and our cities in a way which is ultimately empowering, and then to create cadres of like minds within the city to be able to amplify or magnify, the political power or the agenda of that small group. And imagining one day being able to sit down as an organization and say, in the areas of economic empowerment, education, and community development, these are our three objectives. And then have enough influence within those cities to be able to create sample legislation or legislation that can then be passed across the country within those municipalities. And to have that be the mechanism to start to begin to create change at the municipal level rather than going to the federal level. You'll have to
Yep.
do that at one point, but that is a very difficult first bite to take out of the apple. So we're working to coordinate those efforts increasingly in our country. And now, as a result of the trip that we most recently took to Israel, we had some African leaders who are a part of our delegation who have expressed a similar interest to work with us to create a comparable network on the continent. So if you have enlightened minds here, you have enlightened minds there, and then folks can begin to kind of, work together in a solution oriented way. I mean, I'm not trying to upset the apple cart. I don't want any alphabet agencies looking for me. We're not trying to do that. We're just trying to connect people and have constructive conversations
Yeah.
for the uplift of our people here and around the world.
Yeah. So, what's an example of a piece of legislation that you're talking about that you'd like implemented in a certain city and then replicated across the country?
I mean, there are a lot of examples. I mean, there have been things that we have done in the wake of the George Floyd situation, having individuals who are mayors come together, think through positive changes that they could make within their police agencies, having those implemented, and then sharing some of those practices with other mayors that they could then use within their respective law enforcement agencies to try to help create policies that will then they could not necessarily become standardized, but to help create best practices in the space to ensure the proper community policing in these communities across the country. And that is going to be augmented by the fact that I'm very proud on the most recent trip that I took of NBEC leaders. We had some major law enforcement officials who were part of our trip, including two who have either currently or going to serve as presidents of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, so that our mayors, law enforcement officials can continuously work together to improve processes in what is a critical area of life in the African American community, and that's community policing. We want well-trained police officers who are going to keep our community safe and to recognize and protect human rights and human dignity. So that's one of the areas that we're working on. And then now we're going to soon begin to start to develop more robust economic empowerment initiatives as well. Like I'll give you an example. During the first Trump administration, there's a member of our organization who was in the administration and worked in a position which dealt with kind of domestic policy, urban policy, empowerment zones, and things of that nature that the administration was looking to move. And at first, you had members of the Congressional Black Caucus who were like, "We're not dealing with the president at all. Like, we don't want to even have the conversation." So we had mayors who were a part of our group who were like, "Okay, we know this individual. I don't want to call his name, but we know this individual. We trust him. And if there's a log jam, because you got certain democratic institutions that are like, we're not even going to engage with the president, like, we'll engage. We'll take some of those resources because we see our community in need. We'll be the front line." Folks took some of those resources, put them to good use in their communities. That then broke the log jam. And then writ large, you start seeing more people taking those funds and then using them in the way they were meant to be utilized. But, that's not something that we're ever going to call 60 Minutes and say, "Hey, let me tell you about what we did." We're not going to go on the New York Times and, have an expose written about it, even though I did kind of just share it with y'all.
Yeah.
But when I think about what our community needs to continuously gain and leverage its power, there's obviously what happens at the grassroots level, but then there's also grass tops coordination that needs to happen amongst trusted networks of people to make things happen.
Brother, given your experience, I wanted to ask you a question related to historically Black colleges and universities.
Mm-hmm.
Is there still a formal role for those institutions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's what I'll say. As a graduate of a historically Black college and university, I went to Clark Atlanta University. One of the things it did for me is, growing up in Houston, my mother she wanted to hit the best public schools. So she moved into ostensibly the whiter area of the community. So when I showed up at school from kindergarten all the way through like ninth grade, I'd be one of only like 2 or 3 Black kids in the school. All right. Told you earlier about what had been instilled in me. So even in the midst of those environments, I was still able to shine. But I didn't recognize that there was something in me that needed to be spoken to in the guise of just a reaffirmation of what it meant to be Black and what it meant to be proud. And my historically Black college experience, to go to the Atlanta University Center, Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse, Spelman, and to see people who look like me just excelling, flourishing, everybody from the janitor to the university president to the board of directors to the alumni. It was just a powerful representation of Black excellence in ways that I had not seen in the ways that I was formally educated. So I'll be completely honest with you. That gave me not only an academic education, it filled me up in ways where now when I walk into rooms, I have never felt a deficit. I have never walked into a room of diverse people and felt even a modicum of insecurity, as though I somehow don't measure up, because that experience filled me in a way that is an inexhaustible sense of pride and self-determination that came from it. So if HBCUs don't do anything else in the grand scheme of things, and they do tremendous things, I think that they help provide leaders who attend those institutions with a sense that there isn't a door that I can't walk into and succeed.
Well, there's, I'm certainly a believer. There is power in segregation. I always think about Negro League baseball, and people, some people like to have a narrative. Oh, those poor black players, they weren't able to play in the big leagues, and woe is them. And in my research, at least a third of the time, Negro League baseball made more money than white baseball. They introduced things like the All-Star game. That was a Negro League innovation. And as I'm sure you brothers know, probably about half those teams are owned by black men. And even some percentage of those black men own the rail companies that move the teams around. And so, interesting. Happy to
Absolutely.
hear your perspective on it.
I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, as long as you may have, those pockets, as long as at the end of the day, there's an overarching construct to which we all feed into, like let's say Americans, as long as there's something that all these particular disparate parts may feed into that becomes a unifying type of identity, I think it's a palatable condition. So, at the end of the day, I went to a historically black college and university, and I'm incredibly proud of it. And it was kind of a safe space for me to develop into the person that I am today. But while that exists as a reality in my life, I'm not limited just to experiences within my own community. I now walk into diverse environments without any fear or any intimidation and know that I can flourish in any environment. So it's helped me tremendously.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You talk about your background growing up in predominantly white areas of Houston, Texas.
Mhm.
You were able to build, your parents helped you build this armor in that you weren't defined by your race or any of these other characteristics. Are you are an individual with gifts, right?
Mhm.
But we are at a time when where there's an obsession with race, with these identity categories, and we're about to enter a period, it seems, that there's going to be a backlash against things like diversity, equity, and inclusion that have
Seems
been.
like seems like I think we are in the full throes of it.
There
But
you
go
go.
ahead.
All right. Well, I was just leading the witness there, but you went the whole way. You went the whole way. All right. So talk
Mhm.
about that. What does this? What does this mean for a nation or a subset of the nation that was so obsessed with identity and race being the thing that
Yeah,
defined your sense of possibility?
you,
What
you
is?
know, this was funny because I talk about this with some of my close friends. I don't know that I'm ready to write an article about this yet, but one of the things that I say, like when I see, because I really feel like in the wake of George Floyd, that there was an international moment where people were like, you know what, maybe African Americans have had, some unfair disadvantages heaped upon them. And there seemed to be a sentiment where folks were like, okay, let's figure out how we can finally make this right. And then it seemed as though everybody else was like, oh, this is our moment. Like, we're not going to just allow the black community to be the sole beneficiary of all this good sentiment. So
Right.
we're going to put a battery in y'all's back and let you kind of walk up to the front. And then once, the doors open, we're going to swing around you. And then we're going to be the ultimate beneficiary. So what I say sometimes jokingly to my friends who are from different countries is I say in the history of the United States, you have between white folks, Native Americans, and black folks, we have a conversation that's been going on that precedes all of y'all by decades. Okay, we're having a grown folks conversation about some things that happened in this nation's history. And it almost seems as though, with the civil rights movement, things that happened in the Nixon administration around affirmative action. So it's almost a recognition of if we can do some things which can bring about a leveling, it's an act of goodwill. It's
Yep.
justified. We should do it. And then it's almost as though those forces that helped create those opportunities were like, I had that there set for you. And then it's almost like a VIP section in a club. Like you had 12 seats reserved, but then you showed up with like 40 people in the entourage. So it's like, now I can't give you the section. You know what I'm saying? Because you allowed too many other people to come in, and now it's convoluted. And see, whereas you might have continued to ride off of that goodwill, well deserved, it's now become too chaotic. It's now become too confused. There's too many different people who are trying to line up to, partake. And in the confusion of it all, the national sentiment was just like dispense with all of it. And it's like things that historically had advantaged us in terms of our ability to get in higher education spaces, C suites, government contracting, economic opportunity, may have all fallen by the wayside because of all the chaos and confusion that happened in that space. And I feel like now the challenge for us is, as Black leadership networks, to say, okay, how can we continue to try to effectuate some similar types of outcomes in new and innovative ways? And that's why one of the things, like in having the opportunity to travel to Israel and to build relationships with leaders over there and to learn about the things that they're doing in innovation and to share with Israeli leaders some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that exist within our community, and to hear real, genuine receptivity about folks being able to do business. We've had members in our network that have developed business relationships with Israeli companies. We have conversations now happening with ambassadors from Africa, and opportunities are going to open up on the African continent. So it's like if one door is closing, then instead of just kind of continuously bemoaning the fact that, these opportunities are limited, we see ourselves kind of like a forward expeditionary force in terms of trying to identify new markets, new opportunities. It's not going to be able to fill up the entire gap, but I think when circumstances change, you don't just throw up your hands in defeat. You start trying to think strategically about other avenues and other strategic partnerships that you can develop to kind of make up that gap. And that's the work that we're really focused on doing now in this spirit where people seem to be turning against DEI.
I mean, the president has put these two concepts in stark contrast with each other: DEI and merit. Merit, merit. When you hear those words or that compare, how does that hit you? Is that something we as a Black community should be fearful of when the president says we want a merit-based society? How do you take that?
No, so like it just reminds me of what my parents told me, and you two might have heard that when you were young too. Like, if you're going to go up against somebody from outside our community, you have to be twice as good, and that ethic, I think, is really what helped us develop into the people that we are today. I never walked into a door with the sense of, just because my skin color is
Yes.
a particular hue, that the standards are going to be dropped and that I'm ultimately going to be able to acquire the position for no other reason than, my race. I remember I went to the University of North Texas before I transferred to Clark Atlanta University. And I would walk around on campus, and like one of the things that really upset me is that white students would see me and they'd be like, "Oh, he's here because of some kind of affirmative action program, or he's this or he's that." And I've scored like 400, 500 points higher than you on the SAT. Like, that's why I'm here. And I didn't like that connotation, that
Hmm.
because I was in a particular environment, that the only reason I could have been there was because of my skin color. And I think that, and it's unfortunate to hear it at times, because now seeing somebody in a position and maybe, they have one bad day or one bad interview, folks are like, "Oh, it's just because they're a DEI hire." I think that term is being used way too liberally. And I think it's also kind of giving license to people who actually have some negative attitudes towards people of color, is giving them a politically correct way of saying what they really feel. So, if merit is ultimately the right way to do it, I mean, that's what exists in nature. Everything is about, the best, trying to be the best. And if you're operating in ways which are antithetical to nature, which is not encouraging people to be the best that you can be. Yeah, that's you're not on a road to enhanced survivability by doing that. So, there's a complicated way of saying it's the best way to do it because it's the most natural way to do it. And it continuously inspires people to compete because competition creates excellence and to be the very best that they can be. And then to attain these successes and not be labeled or painted with the brush of the only reason why you got there is because the standards were lowered in order for you to be able to succeed.
Very good. Well, let's move to our speed round. So I'm going to offer up
Uh-oh.
a couple of names, and we eager to hear your perspective on which one you choose and why. So, of course, we're going to start with Malcolm or Martin.
Martin. Can I say this though? So here's the thing, because a lot of people say that, and I think like most people just reflexively say Malcolm. I mean, I share this in jest because we had a good rapport here. Malcolm X has some very bold and powerful pronouncements. Right? Do we agree?
Yes.
Agreed.
Malcolm X was in Brooklyn, okay, and he was in a largely black area of Brooklyn, surrounded by the fruit of Islam. Martin Luther King was in the South, where people were getting killed on a daily basis. Okay. It irks me when I hear people from my community in this day and age denigrate Martin Luther King's message as not necessarily being as aggressive or as robust, because he was in a different mix of, social, cultural, and racial dynamics. And then I think he also recognized that he was going to have to follow, as best he could, a politically pragmatic path to ultimately achieve the ends that we needed as a community. And making pronouncements which would offend the very people who you were going to have to negotiate to effectuate these ends, it's not a prudent strategy. At the end of the day, it wasn't necessary for him to pound his chest and try to be robust. He was charged to navigate the path, and he chose the way that was necessary in order for him to achieve that. So I say Martin Luther King. That wasn't speed on my part. Sorry.
No, that was appreciate the depth. I'll tell you, someday we're gonna pull together all the answers to that question around Malcolm or Martin, and it's a encyclopedic knowledge that
I feel like
most
people say Malcolm, don't they?
I'd say it's probably 60-40 Martin.
Really? Okay.
Would you agree, Ian? 60-40?
Yeah, I would. And for not always the same standard rationale.
No.
Okay.
No, we've gotten some really interesting. In fact, an episode that's yet to be released, a reverend selected Malcolm X, and he said the reason why is he didn't respect the personal life of Martin Luther King. We haven't heard that over almost 60 episodes, but that's that's another place to place a flag.
Now, can I say this?
Please.
Okay, here we go.
Both were necessary because often in a negotiation, you got to play the inside and the outside game. Okay. So if I'm sitting across from somebody and I'm being rational and they're not embracing my rational approach, sometimes it's necessary to have somebody else outside that's like making a little bit of noise, because it's like, if you're not going to deal with me, then the only other alternative that you have is this person right here, and you really don't want that smoke. So, sometimes if you have both personalities coordinating, not to say that happened, but we need to start thinking strategically like that as a people. It's a negotiation strategy. So sometimes you need both to achieve your ends.
Jim Brown or Muhammad Ali?
Muhammad Ali. You want me to expound?
You got to give us the why.
It's the courage. It's the sacrifice. I mean, at the apex of his career, there was a belief that he held so strongly that he was literally willing to walk away from it all. And you don't really see the courage of someone's convictions to that degree. not trying to speak negatively against Jim Brown in any way, because Jim Brown's path to advocating around African American issues was notable and was effective. But if you look at Ali leaving his career for a period over ideas and values that were central to his being, and Jim Brown leaving football to go to Hollywood. I mean, nothing against Hollywood, but it's just they were taken away from their respective sports at their prime for entirely different reasons. And I think that both maintain their same commitment to the advancement of the race throughout their lifetime. But I draw distinctions at how they chose to walk away from their career at its heights.
And just for our audience, of course, when Muhammad Ali had that issue, Jim Brown organized the great black athletes of that time to support Muhammad. So that's just for our audience. But
no, I'm gonna get some text messages when this airs. We get some angry text messages when this airs.
Elon Musk or Steve Jobs?
Oh, come on, man. I would say Steve Jobs, only because he had a lane and he stayed in his lane. He was a genius when it came to the design of Apple products. And just because he was a genius in designing technology which changed our lives, Steve Jobs did not say, well, let me pontificate on nutrition. Let me pontificate on sports in Vietnam. It's like he knew what he was good at, and he stayed in his lane. So, that's kind of how I feel like in our community. Like a lot of times we celebritize, we love celebrities, and I'm like, just because somebody can sing or dribble a basketball does not qualify them to speak on economic policy in the United States of America. Just because you build rocket ships and, you likely one day going to go to Mars, that doesn't necessarily qualify you to just throw a dart at a board and feel like you're now an authority on every subject under the sun. So nothing against them, but I just prefer focused expertise rather than thinking you can do anything.
Very good. And the last one, a little bit light, Tucker Carlson or Joe Rogan?
Joe Rogan. I like Tucker Carlson, man. He's very intelligent, and he knows he's intelligent. It comes his sense of his own intelligence comes through loud and clear in his interviews, and there's nothing against that. He has a gift. I prefer Joe Rogan because he seems to just have boundless intellectual curiosity about every subject, and he's a very skillful questioner. He draws it out of the guest rather than always using the platform as a way to proselytize.
Excellent. Thank you, my brother.
Okay, well, it's amazing. Our time has gone by so quickly.
I made it.
Well, no. We got one more question.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on.
Our closing question, where you get to share your wisdom. And we ask all of our guests to give advice to a young man, imaginary, but still Daryl, who's 16 years old, Black kid. He lives in forgotten USA, this imaginary urban city, where he's hearing a lot of messages that, frankly, it sounds like your parents are trying to ensure you did not hear.
Yeah.
Or you didn't fall prey to. So, but imagine you've got that Daryl who's hearing that this is a nation built with destruction, right? What advice would you give to Daryl, 16, who's trying to figure out his way in the world?
One of the things that I always share when I talk to young people is that you have to guard your mental space. I'm solidly of the belief that your life is a manifestation of your most dominant thoughts. What you think on grows. Thought ultimately impacts and creates reality. People can accept that notion or they can reject that notion, but there's a lot of historical knowledge which kind of validates that fact. So with that being the case, you got to guard your mental space. Um, you will either be inner directed, which means the impetus for what you do in your life comes from the inside out and you impose your will on the world, or you'll be what I call excessively receptive or soft brain, meaning you will just be a receptacle for
Mm,
what other people put inside you. And
mm,
you are either going to create your reality by intention or by default. And if you allow people to tell you what you can do, what you can't be, what life has in store for you, the limits, the box that you have to remain in a mental universe, they don't have the ability to create in your reality. I tell people all the time, my students, I'm like, if you want to be president of the United States, and I was adamantly opposed to you having any type of success in your life, and I determined I was going to block it. I could block some channels, but this is an infinite universe. If you are 100% convinced that this path is available for you, the universe is going to find a way to make it happen. The only way I can defeat you with my words is if you embrace them and
mm.
then use those thoughts against yourself. Okay?
Yes, sir.
If I tell you you'll never be this, y'all will never have the greatest podcast on earth, and if you just believe it, then I'm actually causing your mind to work against you being able to achieve these outcomes. So I'm terribly troubled. Like when I watch the news, when I watch things that are being promoted towards us in Black culture through like rap and other kind of forms of programming that I think are designed to infiltrate our defenses and then plant seeds which ultimately work against us. I just encourage people to try to become inoculated against that and to have a view of I call it your spiritual ideal, which is kind of like the highest conception of who you believe you're meant to be in this life. An objective that's so high that you wouldn't tell your best friend because you think they might laugh at you. I think when you arrive on something that causes you that kind of angst about whether or not you would actually communicate it, that's really what you're meant to do. You know, that's really what you're meant to
Beautiful.
do. And I
Beautiful.
think if you think on that and if you work towards that and if you take decisive action and are consistently working in that direction, you might not get there, but you're going to get a lot further than where you were when you first started the contemplation. So that's what I would tell them. You know, control your mind space, use your thoughts to create your reality, and do not allow anybody I don't want to call it the privilege, but the access or the influence to be able to talk you off your game.
Yes. Wow. What you think on is what creates your reality.
Absolutely, brother.
Great words from Darius Jones. Well, Darius, thank you for
Absolutely.
everything you're doing with NBEC. Sounds like it's an organization that has created a foundation that has.
You'll be hearing more about us.
Yeah, we will. We
Uh,
will. I know we will. I know we will. And I have a feeling not only will affect the Black community, but it'll affect positively the country as a whole.
Who much is given, much is required, brother. And I'm
Yeah,
just bringing people with that mindset together to punch above our weight. So
there you go.
that's
There you,
the work.
there you go. All right.
All right.
Well, once again, thank you, our listeners, for watching the latest episode of The Invisible Men. If you'd like to see other episodes, you can go to www.invisible.men, or you can hear us on any of the podcast platforms, Spotify, or otherwise. But Nike, as always, great to see you.
Absolutely.
Darius, thank you for joining us, man. We're proud of what
All
you're
right,
doing.
brothers. You be
Thank you,
blessed.
brother.